You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible. All right, folks, let's talk about voting rights. Stacey Abrams has been really focused on this issue since, even before she ran for governor, but certainly since she lost to Brian Kemp where there were some serious issues when it came to voting. Well, she appeared before Congress yesterday, urging them to fully reinstate a portion of the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court struck down. That decision opened the floodgates for massive voter suppression that we've seen all across the country. Abrams urged lawmakers to address the issue on the 6th anniversary of the Shelby County v. Holder, the 2013 Supreme Court ruling that struck down a key section of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Here's part of her testimony.
One of the most pernicious effects of Shelby can be found in the very act of casting a vote. Section 5 provided an effective check against hyper-local suppressive tactics like excessive poll closures or challenge proceedings against voters of color, as occurred in Georgia in 2015. Of 159 counties in Georgia, 156 counties removed the highest rate of voters from the rolls post-Shelby, which resulted in an increase in the number of voters being forced to cast provisional ballots. Last election cycle, separate federal courts ruled against Georgia policies for rejecting absentee ballots and ballot applications under trivial pretenses, for implementing an inconsistent provisional ballot system, and for improperly disallowing access to translators in the polling booth. While these lawsuits brought remedy to some, thousands more may have faced similar discrimination without the resources or the knowledge to gain relief. Post-Shelby, voting rights groups must too often rely on resource-intensive litigation and advocacy work to protect the fundamental right to vote for voters of color. This anti-voting system has the concomitant effect of harming taxpayers, as states must expend tax dollars to defend voter suppression in court. At the end of the 2018 contest, I acknowledge the legal result of an election marred by widespread election irregularities. I also redoubled my commitment to voting rights through the creation of Fair Fight Action, which has filed a federal lawsuit against the Georgia electoral system, asking for Georgia's pre-clearance requirement to be reinstated under Section 3. The proposed Voting Rights Advancement Act and Voting Rights Amendment Act represent considerable progress towards restoring the power of the Voting Rights Act, including modern-day protections that require nationwide pre-clearance to attack the broad reach of voter suppression. I strongly urge Congress to take action today, and I thank you for the opportunity to address this committee.
Now, look what's happening in Florida, where buried inside of their voting law, they have something dealing with that voting locations must provide sufficient non-permitted parking to accommodate the anticipated amount of voters. One group, they say that's specifically targeting colleges. Under that previous section of the Voting Rights Act, any law passed in Florida would have had to have been pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. Dr. Carter, this is, again, Republicans were absolutely waiting on this. They were waiting for the Supreme Court to rule, and literally the moment the court ruled, they rushed a series of voter ID laws, massive voter suppression all across the country.
Absolutely. I mean, this was their opening. And the thing about the Supreme Court provision is it doesn't tell Congress that they can't come up with a new formula. Congress has just decided that they're not going to, effectively gutting the Voting Rights Act and allowing all of these shenanigans to go on in North Carolina and Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, you name it. Every place had some form of voter ID to attack, you know, allegedly voter fraud, which doesn't really exist, doesn't really occur. But surprise, surprise, most of the people that go after and most of the people that are harmed are black and brown communities, poor communities. So you had ramped up efforts at voter ID. You had exact match in Georgia, which was catastrophic for black voters in that state. I mean, something as small as a hyphen could have your whole voter registration invalidated in that state. And it is no wonder why that election was stolen from Stacey Abrams. But this kind of stuff is happening all over. And we know that Republicans thought about this, and they thought long and hard about all the ways in which they could suppress black voters.
And Michael, it was not just black folks. It was the white guy who sued in Ohio when they removed his name for the voting rolls by saying, well, he had not voted in a couple of elections. It went to the Supreme Court. He actually lost that case, which allowed for them to remove folks from the voting rolls if you had not voted in a previous election. Then they said, well, we sent a notice as if a person will actually have seen that notice. And you have Democrats who are trying to wake up on this on the state level. And that's the real issue. What Democrats have done is I believe, the mistake they've made, they've solely focused on the federal level. Now, after the 2012 midterm elections, when they got 2010 midterm elections, when they got thumped, then all of a sudden they realized, oh, hell, we got to get serious. It's on the state level. In Ohio, Alicia Reese has been trying to get this ballot initiative put on the ballot that would guarantee the right to vote, that would basically end this crap every single year where you're having to file suits. And what's interesting is progressive groups, Democrats, won't fund the damn initiative.
Well, first of all, Stacey Abrams is an extremely impressive person. I mean, she's just fabulous. I love the work she's doing. But we've had an opportunity for some odd reason, and we know the reason, but, the Voting Rights Act should be permanent. This is not something that should come up every
First,
decade.
Shouldn't even be a damn need for a specific act.
Of course not. It's ridiculous.
I mean, that's first.
But we've had two opportunities over the last 25 years. In Clinton's first term, you had the House and the Senate. Obama's first term had the House and the Senate. So we've had opportunities to try to make it permanent, but of course it wasn't a priority, and we'll get to it. And then, of course, you lose the midterms, and then you can't get to it.
And then you have Red Map, right, where Republicans were paying attention, and for relatively little money, they flipped state legislatures across this country to make these really horrific changes, right? And because elections are really ran by states and not the federal government, that's where you really need to really have this momentum happening.
But the other thing is, I also keep telling civil rights groups, I said this, I moderated a panel that was 2 years ago, Congressional Black Caucus, and so it was Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. It was Cheryl Eiffel, NAACP, LDF, the California Secretary of State. It was NAACP, all different groups up there. Leon Russell for the NAACP. I said, y'all got to start communicating this to white folks. This bill is specifically intended to ensure young white voters on college campuses don't vote. In 2012, there was a white clerk in Wisconsin who said she moved an early voting location off of a college campus because too many of them were voting Democrat. and they other places, they actually Ohio, when they struck it, and then what they started doing was they started limiting. Okay, well, only one location. Yeah. Then they would choose a place that was far out with a small parking lot. Then, of course, we saw in Wisconsin. The voter ID law, which did get approved by the Obama Department of Justice, but then even though it got approved, Scott Walker's office dragged their feet. Federal judge called me and say, "Why in the hell are y'all so slow to even issue the licenses?" What I keep trying to tell the civil rights groups is, y'all got to start saying to white folks, this ain't just about us. They don't want, if you young and white, they don't want you voting. If you are older and white, and you are center left, they don't want you voting. And I'm like, you have to do that as well so they can wake the hell up and say, damn, it's not just about us. Because in Maine, Republicans, again, how dastardly they are, they got rid of same-day voter registration. Nobody asked for it. The voters came back 2 years later, put it back on the ballot, and it passed by almost 70%. They said, look, we ain't tell y'all to do this here.
Right. But, I mean, you saw this in North Carolina with students at Appalachian State, right? A predominantly white institution where the students realized this when they were trying to get someone out that was too progressive in that district in Asheville. But I think, when you see this kind of stuff, and Rep. Sewell has been pushing this with the Voter Rights Advancement Act, right? That we can replace this, right? We can have a formula. We can come up with one. We can use a really common sense one. Don't try to take people voting rights away, and you won't be a covered jurisdiction. And that's largely sort of what this formula was. I mean, it had more numbers to it, but that's essentially what it was. And it wasn't just states in the Deep South. It was places in the West, because we had things happening with Native American voting rights. We have stuff happening with Latino voting rights. It's about, all of these kinds of people who are having their lives affected by these really terrible decisions.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, they're back. MarijuanaStock.org has another great investment opportunity. If you were lucky enough to invest in the last crowdfunding campaign, they raised a bunch of money in just a few months investing in legal marijuana farms. Those initial investors now own shares of a publicly traded company. They are certainly on fire. Now they have a new investment opportunity that is as good, if not even better, than the last. I'm talking about industrial hemp CBD. For those who don't know, the hemp plant is the cousin to marijuana with a much higher concentration of CBD. which means hemp CBD gives you all the medical benefits of marijuana without getting you high. Until recently, hemp farming was practically illegal in the U.S. and heavily regulated by the DEA. However, the 2018 Farm Bill changed all of that, making it legal to grow hemp CBD in the U.S. and creating one of the largest commodities worldwide. They need land to grow all the plants, which makes for an incredible investment opportunity. And that's where our good friends at 420 Real Estate come in. Their business model is simple. They buy land that supports hemp CBD grow operations and lease it to licensed, high-paying tenants. That's right, they are hemp CBD landlords, and you can get in on the action. You can invest in this crowdfunding campaign for as little as $200 up to $10,000, something that you may not want to miss out on. Go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org to get in the game and to do it now. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.